Howdy all. Next speaker is Shay Sullivan. She holds a bachelor's degree in linguistics from the University of Montana. It was accompanied by a post-secondary certificate in language rejuvenation and maintenance via Dr. Graymorning, and a master's degree in linguistics at the University of Colorado Boulder. She's currently a doctoral student in linguistics at the University of Arizona. She's been mentored extensively by Dr. Graymorning, the developer of Accelerated Second Language Acquisition, or ASL, or ASLA, and has assisted him with 8 language teacher training workshops in ASLA for several communities in Alaska, Canada, Germany, as well as the USA and Australia. Shay is primarily interested in the strategies that communities employ to revitalize their heritage language, specifically language teaching strategies, and how these can be improved. Additionally, her interests lie with engaging linguists in her field to be more directly involved in language revitalization efforts in a positive, productive way and through critical linguistics. She's extremely dedicated to her work and what she does, which I'll be super happy to be here. Anything else?
Alright, thank you everybody for having me in that warm introduction, Ross. So before I get started, I'd like to say thank you to the warm welcome to Gumbaynggirr country. I'd like to say thank you to the Gumbaynggirr community for hosting us here. Thank you to Clark and Kamala for your efforts at organizing this conference and putting this up. I'd like to thank my mentor, Dr. Graymorning, for all of the academic help that he's provided for me to get me to where I'm at today. I also would like to acknowledge my parents, who are very influential to me and have worked to get me to where I'm at today. I'd like to acknowledge my sweet mother, who is still with us. My father on the right here passed away in 2021, and I just lost my my stepfather on July 7th of this year. So I have come to Australia with a heavy heart and thick with grief. And but I also feel very fortunate to be here and be able to share that with you guys. You know, it's not normally at academic conferences that you get to stand up in front of people and cry or shed tears or share your grief or talk about those things. So I've really valued this conference in the past and the atmosphere that it creates to hold people. A little bit more about me. I started my higher education at the University of Montana. I earned a bachelor's degree in linguistics. I completed a post-secondary certificate in language rejuvenation and maintenance under Dr. Graymorning, and then I decided to continue my studies in linguistics at the University of Colorado Boulder with a master's degree. And the reason that I chose that university was because I had taken Dr. Graymorning's Arapaho class several times and was interested in working with a linguist at Colorado who had done extensive documentation work on Arapaho. My relationship and interactions with him ended up being incredibly negative, and so I moved away from that work. I didn't want to stay at the University of Colorado Boulder for a PhD, but I wanted to get a PhD, so I applied to the University of Arizona, where I am currently a PhD student. I've always been very passionate about language revitalization and the sort of idea that, you know, millions of people across the planet are unable to or don't have access to, you know, areas in life where they're able to speak their language means that there are lots of people in the world that live oppressed, and that is something that is deeply troubling to me. But it really has only been in the past 6 months to a year where I've kind of realized the application of language revitalization to my own history and story. My great-grandparents were born in Ireland and were Irish speakers. My great-grandfather ran out of work in the mines and decided to get on a boat and move to Butte, Montana, so that he could work in the mines, continue work. And my great-grandmother got on a boat with him because she and her family were fisher people, and they were tired of the British confiscating large portions of the fish that they would bring in. So I grew up with stories of what the Sullivan last name meant, what it meant to be Irish, what it meant to live through and endure a famine, and yeah. So it's just been kind of in the past recent little bit that I've really kind of connected with that stuff. But what I would like to share with you guys today, what I've been thinking about extensively over the past few years, are critical reflections of my participation in a class that is offered at every university that I have been at. I've taken this class 4 times. It's called Linguistic Field Methods. So linguistics is housed within the field of anthropology, and it has long been the standard for anthropologists to go into a community, live with a community, study them, create documents and analysis of what they interpret, and the same is very true of field linguists. It's been a long history of linguists dropping into communities, extracting language from people, analyzing data, creating documents, and not providing anything back to community members. And so I would like to share with you guys reflections, critical analyses of professors that I've worked with, these classes that I've taken, and myself and my own participation in these things as well. One of the main things that you learn in field methods classes is elicitation, and elicitation is a process of linguistic extraction that also fragments language from the people who speak it. So graduate field methods or elicitation documentation courses are designed to give graduate students initial training in field linguistics, and initial discussions center around what it is to do quote-unquote field work, be in the field, the equipment that's necessary to do the job, negotiating research requirements with local IRBs, foreign governments, vaccination, safety, yada yada, how to coerce informants into giving you the data that you're looking for. Professors of these courses pre-select a quote-unquote consultant who receives a minimal form of payment for their time spent with the class over the semester. This is really similar to the kind of pay that somebody in an art class would receive for nude modeling. It's very, very minimal pay. The consultant speaks a language about which the field of linguistics possesses very little knowledge. And that is particularly important because the professor tries to select a language that we don't know a lot about to continue doing analysis that contributes to the field of linguistics. And the goal of the course is to provide, as I said, initial training for linguists in eliciting data from speakers, organizing documentation into archives, engage in analysis with quote-unquote raw data. And this is where the 5 sort of core fields of linguistics, phonetics, phonology, morphology, syntax, and semantics come together. But this is also the work that kind of acts as the back to linguistics, that supports all of the other analysis and theoretical stuff that comes out of the field. This is just an example homework assignment that I had from my field methods class at the University of Montana. It's kind of split between 2 pages, so I put the top part up there as typed. It says problem set 117. Select a cultural area from the list below. Nilotic in the southern Anglo-Egyptian Sudan, Bantu, Marshall Islands, Aboriginal Southwest China, Aboriginal Central Australia, Eskimo Northern Canada, with a hunting fishing tribe in Amazon. And they ask you to make out a culturally appropriate word list, including 150 objects and 50 process words. This is usually the goal of field work, and usually what we talk about in field methods classes. This has often been referred to as the Boasian triad, and is what results from eliciting data from speakers. Linguists usually create a dictionary, a grammar book, and a collection of texts. In a language revitalization context, it's questionable what these things do. I don't know an example of anybody who has learned a language or become a speaker of a language from a dictionary or grammar book. There are people who have revitalized or brought languages back on the basis of text, but that's a complicated issue as well. I wanted to include this quote. Anne Storch is a German linguist and professor of American Studies at the University of Cologne. And this is from a book called Colonial and Decolonial Linguistics. So this image in figure 1 shows bike bells, still wrapped in their original packing material. The bike bells belong to the professor who preceded the professor whose successor today is Anne Storch. We inherit things that are put away in little storage rooms next to our offices. These things are not just objects. They're entangled with disciplinary practice, with the complex colonial epistemologies of linguistics. These bike bells were meant for Africa, to pay so-called informants. Their knowledge was turned into a commodity to be rewarded with the equivalent of beads and mirrors. And I really like this image. I think it does a really good summing up of what elicitation has historically looked like and the precedent that it has set in terms of creating hierarchies of relationality, right? You can see here how Frances Dunmore, who was an ethnomusicologist but also did a lot of work with language, is sitting all proper and cleaned up in her gear, ready to elicit data from this Blackfoot elder mountain chief. And a lot of the stuff that I am about to share, really I started thinking about when I was at the University of Colorado Boulder and I was in a field methods class. And the speaker that we were working with was a man named Samuel Kirapash, who was from Kenya. And he spoke a dialect of Maasai. And one day we were leaving class and he shared with me, we were just walking together, and he shared with me that when he comes to our class for elicitation sessions, he comes to class every day with this deep anxiety and dread. And so I stopped and I asked, why? What do you think that's about? And so we sat down on the bench and he thought about it for a while. And then he finally said, it's the same kind of anxiety that I get when I go to the doctor or the dentist. And he said, I think that it really results from my childhood and how I grew up, in rural Kenya, in a Maasai community, and there were these researchers and medical people that would come into our field and would try to take blood samples from us. They would try to give us medication. And I learned at a very young age not to trust doctors and medical professionals because you don't know what they're doing. You don't have access to their specialization, and you have to trust them. And so he said, I have a similar anxiety when I sit in class with you guys and you ask me questions about my language. I don't know what you're doing with it. I don't know what the purpose of it is. It's a similar kind of anxiety for me. So next I want to go ahead and show some sample elicitations from C. Boulder and the University of Arizona most recently. Andrew actually participated in this most recent class at UA with me, so you can give whatever feedback you want in the Q&A. But so an elicitation session usually involves a planned, kind of pre-considered roadmap that's curated by the linguist. It often appears in the form of a word list or sentences, and students in these classes are taught how to sit and elicit these sentences and this data from a speaker, create relevant field notes of data, and then this data is analyzed and becomes the relevant documents. This is the Swadesh list. There was a man many years ago, I can't remember his first name, his last name is Swadesh, And he made this list of around 200 words that he thought were going to be present in every language. So this is a usual starting point of elicitation that linguists will use, is the Swadesh list, because they assume that these will all be accessible to some extent. These are examples of my elicitation planned sessions for my most recent class at the University of Arizona, where we were eliciting and documenting Day2, which is a Manchu language. So on the left, this was my first elicitation plan that I had submitted to my professor. And when following the conversation that I had at Seed Boulder with our Maasai speaker, I decided that I didn't want to make that person uncomfortable anymore in the classroom. So when we had our group elicitation with him, I thought to myself, after having taught ASLA or French using ASLA for my bachelor's degree, why don't I bring some of my images to elicitation? And you could see how immediately he was a lot more animated and was willing to engage with me over pictures. And so I created a scenario where I was speaking the language back to him and I was having him more so teach me over the pictures. And that became a much more comfortable, friendly way of creating things. So this is what I did also for my elicitations at the University of Arizona. The little numbers in the boxes correspond to different pictures that I showed our consultant. And so I just detailed in this paragraph here how I plan to elicit tense and aspect from the speaker, tense, aspect, and mood. And you can see how I have different verbs here. So, walking, he's walking, he walks, he walked, he was walking, he will walk. And so essentially I just sat, with the speaker and showed him these images and elicited these sentences from him as naturally as I could. And then this on the right here was my follow-up to that. This was a write-up of the data. Because of the death of my stepfather, I didn't have time to scan the handwritten notes that I wanted to be able to, but this was all done, handwritten, sitting with the speaker in the classroom. And then afterwards, you sort of pour over the recording and retranscribe everything. So you can see how in the first line, there's the IPA, and then in the second line is the Manchu orthography that we were eliciting from the speaker as well. And every time I've taken these classes, the notion of transcribing things in IPA is always something that linguists bicker and argue about. And the reason for that is because the IPA oozes with ideology in and of itself, but this is a subjective thing. Like, this is how I heard this person's language and how they said it. So this is my own interpretation of what I heard come out of somebody else's mouth. This is an image of an elicitation session last semester at the University of Arizona. You can see our speaker that's at the end of the table here, Robert, and there's a student who is playing an Uno game with him. And so they're listing colors, numbers, and terms for playing Uno. And you can see on the whiteboard how our professor in the back has been, writing all of these words out like crazy as we're, doing analysis here. The recorder is right here in front of the speaker. This was our speaker from Kenya, Sam Karapash, and my group that worked with him. Moving on to just demonstrating some samples of analysis. This is the IPA chart that I was just speaking about. Sort of oozes with ideology. It was updated as of 2020. It's supposed to represent all of the known possible languages or sounds that happen in all of the world's languages, and there are things about it that are very wrong. So grayed out cells, for example, are thought to be articulatorily impossible. But if you look, for example, if you just Google velar trill, which is grayed out up there, you can find a language in southern India that has a velar trill. So why it's grayed out on the IPA, I don't know. This is an example of the documentation of Maasai data, where we're essentially making an archive of what we have elicited. In this column right here, you have the data, the English translation, any comments about the data. You can see on the top row there, I wrote, I'm not sure if the K is aspirated. I apparently thought that was a really important thing to write down. The date, the session, the items, the sound file, and then who had transcribed the data. And so you can see how in this one we just have basic words, the word for head, hair, eye, ear, body parts, blood, bone, flesh. And we slowly just add and kind of build onto it. So these are actual sentences. The man is speaking, the man is laughing, sleeping, whistling. Some more examples of words. And then these are, again, more complicated sentences that we just continue to add on to. These were my homework write-ups at the University of Colorado when we were working on the side. My homework one, my professor asked us, tell us what you think is going on with the phonetics and phonology of the language. So that was what I wrote up. Pratt analysis displays a clear form and structure in this, blah, 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 blah. There are some situations where nasal places simulation happens, and we'll get into the nitty-gritty of it. But my homework 4, you can see on the right here how my professor had asked me for an analysis of morphology. So on the top I had an analysis of noun morphology, and then in the second part I had an analysis of verbal morphology. This was a story that we elicited from our Maasai speaker about tortoise and an egret, and it explains why tortoises have the shaped shell that they have and why egrets are able to fly. This is an example of a student at CU Boulder who in class was demonstrating what he believed the phonemic inventory was based off of the data that we had already elicited. This is a vowel chart that somebody in our class had created of the speech that was documented from the speaker. And it was after this was shown, projected on the board in the class when the speaker was present. And it was after this class that he shared with me his anxiety about our work together. So, this kind of work has many results and consequences to it. There are 3 or 4 very particular questions that linguists and anthropologists are on a quest to answer that I hear about in my classes all the time, incessantly. First one being, from where did humans evolve? In the course of human history, when did language evolve? What mechanism in the brain is responsible for human language? And how can we compare language and genetics to help answer these questions? I would argue that these questions may never receive answers in the way that academics want to answer these questions. And in a documentary that we watch in one of Dr. Gray Warning's classes, Contemporary Issues of Indigenous People, Gene Hunters, this documentary describes and details geneticists' attempts to coerce Indigenous people in rural communities globally into providing blood samples. These samples extract DNA and placed into genetic banks, which hope to answer questions about human evolution via genetic analysis. The documentary also discusses ethical questions surrounding the U.S. case of coercive cancer research development, where patients were not told that their removed cancerous tumors were used in research, yet medications were later named after these patients. And I see a very similar kind of parallel with genetics and language, and how starting with German philology in the 1700s, there was a very, rich kind of getting to the bottom of making these word lists and trying to compare across languages and map how humans have evolved over time. Dr. Graymorning's daughter recently told me about a book called Columbus and Other Cannibals, which was written by Jack Forbes. And in that book, he talks about how indigenous people have long struggled with the notion of consumption, survival, and killing as a central part of life. Killing requires spiritual preparation for taking life to maintain balance. Animals and plants are asked for their life and things are given. Indigenous people generally don't kill other humans of their tribe, kill for fun, or waste parts of the kill. And in this book, Jack Forbes, who's a Lenape scholar, defines cannibalism as the consumption of another's life for one's own private purpose or profit. I believe that such a notion can and should be extended, not just to slave owners or that kind of historical phenomenon, but also to researchers and academics who invoke these levels and kinds of relationality, creating hierarchy where researchers take from communities and don't have anything to offer back. When a linguist engages in practices like elicitation, they invoke lots of different hierarchical relationalities between people. Linguists often possess the symptoms of the Wetiko akin to Forbes' discussion of this sickness of the mind. Those who take data from communities without thinking about their actions are sick in some way. They don't think about the ripple effect that they have when they're interacting with other human beings. They shamelessly consume others' lives in the form of linguistic elicitation. Genetics and language have served academics as tools to answer these questions, both of which require consent from those who quote-unquote own or possess these things. And the parallels of genetics and language can be drawn to answer these questions, starting in the 1700s with comparative German philology based on sound changes. This is an important sort of quote that I like to include from the Kimberley Language Center in Northern Australia, who just sort of are making reflections about their work with a linguist who was very dishonest with them about what they were doing. It reads, one elderly language speaker, when asked to become involved in a bush trip for language learning, stated that she did not need to teach the children herself because she had given all of her language to the linguist who wrote it down in a big book which the children could learn from. This person is literate in her language, but the big book that she was referring to was a PhD thesis. Also, at the University of Colorado Boulder, one day for class, I walked into the room, different class, historical linguistics, and this was written on the board. It reads, the function of language is to control the universe by describing it. And a translation of that would be, the purpose of language is to control the universe of the people who speak it. Right? I don't know who wrote this. I have really good reason to believe that it was written by a linguist, but my professor walked into the room, read that on the board, and said, oh, we're starting with a little bit of philosophy today, aren't we? And we heard from Rod yesterday that philosophy is a white man's word, right? They think that applying philosophy to something like that is sick, deeply troublesome, right? So just quickly wrapping up for some next steps. Linguists should feel lucky and grateful to be able to work with any community, be welcomed into any community, or hear any language. The structure of these kinds of practices needs significant reshaping. There was a paper that was written by Wesley Leonard, who is a Miami scholar, and he asserted that from 2006 to 2016, of the around 1,100 PhD recipients in linguistics from US institutions, only 10 of those people were Indigenous. So we need much more Indigenous representation in the field of linguistics if that is something that people are interested in. But this kind of thought is not going away anytime soon. So that's something that I'm actively trying to do all the time in my work when I'm in these spaces, is try to get people to think about these kinds of questions. And a lot of this stuff was in Rebecca Hatfield's talk yesterday, or many of the things that Tyson shared today in his talk. You know, linguists should ask themselves what kind of person they want to be and the kinds of relationships that they want to engage in with other people. Are you someone who likes authority, who seeks authority? Are you somebody who is interested in creating these relations of hierarchy? And if so, what motivates you? What compels you? Linguists need to be okay with not having their questions answered in this lifetime or ever, and need to value human beings over answering those questions. And linguistics departments really need to restructure how these courses are taught, because this is kind of the basis of where linguists learn how to do this kind of work. And it needs to change. It really needs to become different. So these are my references, and